Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadowman Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Martha Redstone, and I've been a park ranger at Jefferson National Forest for 11 years. That's long enough to know these mountains have their secrets, but nothing prepared me for what happened in the winter of 1974. I'm 39 years old with dark hair that shows my mixed blood, Cherokee from my grandmother's side, European from my grandfather's. Growing up, I never knew which world I belonged to. The Cherokee kid said I was too white. The white kid said I was too Indian. Maybe that's why I ended up here, protecting land that doesn't care about bloodlines. The call came in on February 12th, during the worst ice storm we'd seen in 20 years. Phone lines were down across Newman's Ridge, and the roads were so bad that even our trucks couldn't make it up the mountain. But someone had managed to get word to us about the Goins family. "Whole family's gone," Sheriff Compton told me over the radio. His voice crackled through the static. "Need you up there, Martha. You know those people better than anyone." I did know them. The Goins were Melundian, one of those mysterious mountain families that had been here for 300 years. Nobody really knew where the Melundians came from originally. Some said they were mixed Cherokee, African, and European. Others claimed they were descended from lost Portuguese sailors or Turkish pirates. What I knew for sure was that they'd been persecuted for centuries, pushed deeper and deeper into these mountains until most people forgot they existed. Samuel Goins and his wife Nancy had 8 kids, from little Emma, who was 7 years old, to their oldest boy James, who was 22. They lived in a cabin that had been in their family since before the Civil War, way up on the ridge, where the old-growth timber blocked out the sun, even in summer. I strapped on my snowshoes and started the 3-mile hike up the mountain. The ice hung from every branch like glass teeth, and my breath came out in white puffs that froze to my scarf. Something felt wrong right away. These woods should have been full of winter sounds. Squirrels chattering, birds calling, branches creaking in the wind. Instead, there was nothing but the crunch of my snowshoes. When I finally reached the cabin, I understood why Sheriff Compton had sounded so shaken. The Goins family was arranged in a perfect circle on the main room floor, not scattered like they'd died naturally or even been murdered. Arranged, like someone had positioned each body with care. Samuel sat cross-legged at the center, Nancy beside him holding baby Thomas. The other children formed a ring around them, youngest to oldest, each one facing inward. Their eyes were closed, their faces peaceful. There were no wounds, no blood, no signs of violence at all. But carved deep into the wooden floor around them was a symbol I'd never seen before, a twisted tree with roots and branches intertwining like a Celtic knot. The strangest thing was little Emma. While all the others had their hands folded in their laps, she clutched a small wooden doll against her chest. The doll was carved from dark wood and had real human hair, long and black like Emma's own. Strange symbols were etched into its surface, and when I looked closer I saw dark stains that looked like dried blood. I'd investigated plenty of deaths in my 11 years as a ranger. Heart attacks, hunting accidents, even a few suicides. But I'd never seen anything like this. These people looked like they'd simply decided to lie down and die together. Outside, I noticed something else strange. There were no animal tracks anywhere around the cabin. Not a single bird print in the snow, no squirrel trails, nothing. It was like every living creature in the forest had decided to stay away from this place. My camera wouldn't work properly either. The flash kept firing when I didn't want it to, and when I tried to take pictures of the symbol carved into the floor, the viewfinder went completely black. I'd used this camera for years without problems, but today it acted like it was cursed. As I worked, documenting everything I could, I started getting a terrible headache. The kind that feels like someone's driving an ice pick through your skull. The pain got worse whenever I got near certain spots in the room, especially around the carved symbol. By the time I finished my initial survey, I was so nauseous I had to step outside and vomit in the snow. That's when I saw her, an old woman standing at the edge of the tree line, watching me. She wore a long black coat and had steel-gray hair braided down her back. When our eyes met, she turned and walked into the forest without a word. I followed her tracks in the snow, but after about 50 yards, they simply vanished. Not like she'd turned in a different direction or climbed a tree. The footprints just stopped, like she'd been lifted right up into the air. I hiked back down the mountain as the sun was setting, painting the snow red like spilled blood. My head was still pounding, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the trees. Every few minutes I'd stop and listen, but all I heard was the wind whistling through the ice-covered branches. Back at the ranger station, I called in my report and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. Sheriff Compton said he'd send his boys up when the roads cleared, but that might be days. The medical examiner was snowed in over in Bristol. For now, it was just me and the Goins family secret, whatever it was. I spent most of that night reading everything I could find about the Melundians. Most of it was just rumors and speculation, but one thing kept coming up. They had their own traditions, their own ways of dealing with death and sickness. Some of the old-timers claimed the Melundian families had roots that went back to ancient Celtic druids or African medicine me. The next morning, I hiked back up to the cabin with better equipment, a backup camera, extra film, and a tape recorder to document everything properly. But when I got there, things had changed. The symbol carved into the floor was deeper now, like someone had worked on it all night. The wood shavings were scattered around it in fresh piles. But that was impossible. I'd locked the cabin when I left, and my seal was still intact. Worse, little Emma's position had changed. Yesterday she'd been lying on her side clutching the doll. Now she was on her back, and the doll was sitting upright on her chest, staring at me with its tiny carved eyes. I picked up the doll to examine it more closely, and that's when things got really strange. The moment I touched it, I heard voices. Whispers coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. They spoke in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow I understood them. They were calling my name. Martha Redstone. Martha Redstone. Come home, child. Come home. I dropped the doll like it was on fire and stumbled backward. The whispering stopped immediately, but the silence that followed was almost worse. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. That's when I noticed the footprints. Fresh ones in the snow outside the cabin, circling the building over and over in a tight spiral. They looked like bare feet. Impossible in weather this cold. I followed them around to the back of the cabin, where they led to an old storm cellar I hadn't noticed before. The cellar door was standing open, revealing stone steps that disappeared into darkness. The footprints led right down into that black hole and didn't come back out. Against every instinct I had, I got out my flashlight and went down those steps. The cellar was older than the cabin, much older. The walls were made of stacked stones fitted together without mortar, and strange symbols were carved into every surface. Not like the tree symbol upstairs, but older things, spirals and crosses and shapes that hurt to look at directly. On a wooden table in the center of the room, I found items that belonged in a museum, not a root cellar. There were clay pots filled with dried herbs and what looked like bone fragments. Glass bottles contained liquids that glowed faintly in the darkness, and arranged around the edge of the table were dozens of wooden dolls, each one carved with the same care as little Emma's. But the thing that made my blood freeze was the journal. It was bound in leather so old it was almost black, and the pages were covered with handwriting in several different hands. The earliest entries were dated 1774. I opened it at random and read, "The paying back time comes every 50 years, when the winter is deep and the dead grow restless. We who were wronged demand justice. We who were murdered demand blood. The old covenant must be kept, or all our people will suffer." My hands were shaking as I flipped through more pages. The journal documented generations of deaths, all following the same pattern. Every 50 years, going back 2 centuries, an entire Melundian family would be found dead in their home during the worst winter storm, always arranged in the same circle, always peaceful, like they'd chosen to die. And always, there was a survivor who carried on the tradition. Someone had to live to keep the journal, to remember the old ways, to prepare for the next paying back time. The last entry was in Samuel Goins's handwriting, dated just 3 days ago. The spirits are calling. I hear them in the wind, see them in the shadows. Emma has the gift strongest. She can see what we cannot. The dolls have chosen her, but she is too young. Martha Redstone must carry the burden now. The Cherokee blood in her veins will understand. The time of paying back has come again. I slammed the journal shut and ran up those stone steps faster than I'd ever moved in my life. But as I reached the top, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate steps, climbing up from the darkness below. I spun around, flashlight beam dancing wildly, but the stairway was empty. Empty except for wet footprints that hadn't been there a moment before, leading from the bottom step right up to where I stood. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those wet footprints and heard whispers in languages I didn't know but somehow understood. By morning, I'd made up my mind to find the old woman I'd seen at the tree line. If anyone could explain what was happening, it would be her. It took me most of the day to track down someone who knew who she was. Finally, old Pete Morrison at the general store nodded when I described her. "That'd be Granny Mullins," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Lives way up on Turkey Creek, past where the logging road ends. But Martha, if I were you, I'd leave that old woman alone. Some things are better left buried." I found Granny Mullins's cabin just before sunset, following smoke from her chimney through the thick pine forest. She was waiting for me on her front porch, rocking in an old chair like she'd been expecting me all day. "You went into the cellar," she said before I could speak. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. I found the journal." She nodded slowly. "Then you know about the paying back time." Granny Mullins was ancient, had to be pushing 90, but her dark eyes were sharp and clear. Her long gray hair was braided with beads and feathers in the old Cherokee way, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of years. "Sit down, child. You got Cherokee blood. I can smell it on you. Your great-grandmother was Sally Redstone, wasn't she? Melundian woman from over on Copper Ridge." I stared at her. My family had never talked about our Cherokee heritage, and I'd never heard the name Sally Redstone in my life. "How do you—" "Child, I'm old enough to remember when this whole mountain was Melundian territory. Before the government surveys, before they decided we didn't exist. Sally was a friend of mine, before the troubles started." She told me the story then, rocking back and forth in her chair as the shadows grew longer. In 1774, a family of European settlers had come to Newman's Ridge, claiming they had legal papers to the land. The Melundians had been there for generations, but they had no papers, no deeds, just the old Cherokee understanding that the land belonged to everyone. The settlers wanted the Melundians gone. When the families refused to leave, the settlers came one winter night with guns and torches. They killed 15 people, men, women, and children, and threw their bodies into a ravine. Then they burned the Melundian cabins and claimed the land for themselves. "But the dead don't rest easy when they're murdered," Granny Mullins said. "Every 50 years they come back looking for justice. They take a family, peaceful-like, to balance the scales. Always during the worst winter, always the same way." "But why the Goins family? Why Emma?" "The child has the sight, same as you do. She can see the spirits, talk to them. They need someone who can cross between the worlds." She leaned forward, her eyes boring into mine. "Someone with the old blood." "I don't understand." "Your great-grandmother Sally was supposed to be taken in 1874, but she ran away, married a Cherokee man named Joseph Redstone, changed her name. The spirits have been looking for her bloodline ever since. Now they found you." As if her words had summoned them, the temperature around us dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Our breath came out in white clouds, and frost began forming on the porch railings. Granny Mullins stopped rocking. "They're here," she whispered. I saw them then, shadows moving between the trees, darker than the gathering night. They had no solid form, but I could make out shapes that might have been people once, men and women and children, all watching us with eyes like cold stars. One of them stepped forward, a tall figure that might have been a man. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wind through dry leaves. "The debt must be paid, daughter of Sally. Your blood calls to us across the years." "I'm not Melundian," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm Cherokee." "You are both," the shadow said. "And both peoples were wronged by the same hands. Join us willingly, and your death will be peaceful. Resist, and we will take you piece by piece." More shadows emerged from the forest, dozens of them, surrounding the cabin. I could feel their hunger, their rage, like a cold fire burning in my bones. But I also felt something else, a protective presence, warm and familiar. A new figure appeared between me and the angry spirits. This one was different, solid, real, with kind eyes and long black hair braided with silver. She wore traditional Cherokee dress, and around her neck hung a medicine bag made from white doeskin. "Great-great-grandmother?" I whispered. She nodded. "I am Sally Redstone, child. I've been watching over our bloodline, waiting for this moment." The shadow man hissed like an angry cat. "You cannot protect her forever, old woman. The debt will be paid." "The debt was paid long ago," Sally said firmly. 15 deaths for 15 deaths. But you've taken more than your due. Generations of families, children who did no harm. The balance is broken." "Then how do we end this?" I asked. Sally turned to me, her face sad but determined. "There is only one way, child. You must go to the place where we died, on the night when the veil is thinnest. You must offer your blood willingly, not to die, but to seal a new covenant, one that honors the dead without creating more death." The shadow spirits swirled around us like a tornado of darkness, their voices rising in protest. But Sally held up her hand, and they fell silent. 3 days, she said to them. "Give the child 3 days to prepare. Then wow. End this, one way or another." The shadows faded back into the forest, leaving only the normal night sounds and the smell of winter pine. But I knew they'd be back. Granny Mullins spent the next 3 days teaching me things my own family should have passed down. Cherokee protection prayers, the uses of sacred plants, and how to prepare for a spirit journey. She also told me the exact location of the massacre site, a hidden ravine 2 miles north of the Goins' cabin, marked by a circle of ancient oak trees. "The spirits will be strongest there on the winter solstice," she warned. "That's tomorrow night. They'll try to possess you, make you kill yourself the way they made the Goins family die. But if you can resist long enough to complete the ritual, you might break the curse for good." She gave me a medicine bag like the one Sally had worn, filled with white sage, sweetgrass, and other plants whose names I didn't know. She also taught me the old songs, Cherokee chants that would help protect my soul during the spirit journey. "Remember," she said as I prepared to leave, "the spirits aren't evil, just wounded. They've been trapped by their own anger for 200 years. You're not trying to destroy them. You're trying to set them free." I hiked up to the massacre site just as the sun was setting on December 21st. The circle of oak trees was easy to find. They were massive, older than anything else in the forest, and their branches formed a perfect ring around a small clearing. In the center of the clearing, the ground was lower than the surrounding area, like a shallow bowl. This was where the bodies had been thrown. I could feel them before I saw them. The temperature plummeted, and the hair on my arms stood up like I was touching a lightning rod. Then they emerged from between the trees, dozens of shadow figures, including the tall man who seemed to be their leader. But this time, I also saw Sally. She stood behind me, one hand on my shoulder, whispering Cherokee words of protection. "Begin the ritual," she urged, "before they grow too strong." I knelt in taut. He center of the clearing and opened my medicine bag. Following Granny Mullins' instructions, I arranged the sacred plants in a circle around me, then lit the sweetgrass with a wooden match. The smoke rose straight up in the still air, carrying my prayers to the spirit world. The shadow figures pressed closer, their voices rising in an angry chorus. I could feel them trying to push into my mind, to take control of my body. Images flashed through my head, the massacre, the burning cabins, children crying as they died. The weight of their pain and rage was almost unbearable. Feel our suffering, the shadow leader hissed. Feel what it's like to die alone and forgotten. But I held on to Sally's presence behind me and continued the ritual. Using the sacred knife Granny Mullins had given me, I made a small cut on my palm and let my blood drop onto the earth. I acknowledge your pain, I said aloud. I acknowledge the wrong that was done to you. But I also acknowledge the wrong you've done in return. 15 deaths have become hundreds. Children have died for the sins of their great-great-grandparents. The spirits swirled around me like a hurricane, their voices rising to a scream. I felt claws raking across my arms, saw my own blood spattering the frozen ground. But I continued speaking. I offer my blood freely, not as payment for old debts, but as a bond for new understanding. Let the dead rest. Let the living live. Let the circle be broken here and now. That's when the real battle began. The shadow leader rushed at me, trying to force his way into my body. I felt his presence like ice water in my veins, his memories mixing with mine until I couldn't tell which were real. For a moment, I was a Melundian man in 1774, watching European settlers burn my home and murder my children. The rage was overwhelming. I wanted to kill, to make them pay for every drop of innocent blood. But Sally's voice cut through the fury. You are Martha Redstone, she said firmly, daughter of two peoples, keeper of both traditions. Remember who you are. I fought back, pushing the shadow spirit out of my mind with Cherokee prayers and force of will. As he retreated howling in rage, the other spirits pressed in to take his place. I felt them clawing at my soul, trying to drag me down into their world of endless anger. Join us, they whispered. We are your people. We are your blood. You were my people, I gasped, struggling to stay conscious. But I'm not yours to take. I choose a different path. Using every ounce of strength I had left, I completed the ritual. I spoke the Cherokee words for forgiveness and release, then added my own promise. I will remember you. I will tell your story. But I will not let your pain create more pain. The effect was immediate. A warm light filled the clearing, and the shadow spirits stopped their attack. For the first time, I could see them clearly, not as monsters, but as the people they had once been. Men and women and children with faces full of sorrow and hope. The shadow leader looked at me with eyes that were no longer cold stars. You would remember us, truly. I promise. I'll make sure the world knows what happened here. I'll make sure the Melundian people are never forgotten again. One by one, the spirits began to fade, but now their faces were peaceful. The children smiled as they disappeared. The women nodded their approval. Finally, only the leader remained. The curse is broken, he said. We can rest at last. He looked at Sally, who still stood behind me. Thank you, old friend. You chose well. Then he was gone, and the clearing was empty except for Sally and me. Is it over? I asked. She smiled. This part is, but you have work to do now, granddaughter. The spirits trusted you with their story. Don't let them down. I spent the next 3 months writing the most detailed report of my career. Not the sanitized version I filed with the Forest Service, but the real story. Everything from the Melundian massacre to the broken curse. I documented every detail, every conversation, every supernatural encounter. Then I did something that probably should have cost me my job. I went public. I gave interviews to newspapers and magazines, spoke at universities and historical societies, anywhere people would listen. I told them about the Melundian people, who they were, how they'd lived, and how they'd died. I made sure their story was recorded properly for the first time in 200 years. Some people called me crazy. Others accused me of making it all up for attention. But enough people listened, and enough evidence supported my claims, that things began to change. The state of Virginia officially recognized the Melundian massacre as a historical fact. Newman's Ridge was designated as a cultural preservation area. The old burial ground became a memorial site. Every year on December 21st, I go back to that clearing in the Oak Circle. I light sweetgrass and say prayers for the dead. Cherokee prayers and Christian prayers both, because the Melundians were a mixed people just like me. Sometimes other people join me now, descendants of Melundian families who thought their heritage was lost forever. Cherokee activists, historians who study forgotten American communities. The Goins family is buried in the old Melundian cemetery on Newman's Ridge, their graves marked with traditional Cherokee symbols alongside Christian crosses. Little Emma's wooden doll is buried with her, but not before I learned its secret. Granny Mullins told me those dolls were spirit vessels, ways for the dead to communicate with the living. Emma had been chosen as a bridge between worlds, but she was too young to understand what was happening to her. I'm 55 years old now, 16 years older and hopefully wiser. I still work as a park ranger, but I've become something else too. A keeper of stories that might otherwise be lost. Mixed-blood people like me have always lived between worlds, never fully belonging to any one place. But maybe that's exactly where we need to be, serving as bridges between different peoples and different ways of understanding the world. The supernatural encounters stopped after that winter night in 1974, but the mountains still feel different to me. I see things other people miss, glimpses of movement in the forests, shadows that don't quite match the trees that cast them. But they're not threatening anymore. They're just reminders that this land has a long memory and some stories demand to be told. Last month, a young Cherokee woman came to visit me. She's working on her doctorate in American Studies, writing about forgotten communities in Appalachia. She asked me the same question everyone asks. Do you really believe all that happened to you? I told her what I always tell people. Belief is a luxury for folks who weren't there. I don't believe it happened. I know it did. She nodded, like she understood. My grandmother told me stories like that, said the old ways and the new ways don't always match up, but that doesn't make either one less true. Smart woman, your grandmother. She also said something else. She said people like you and me, we have a responsibility to remember the stories others want to forget. I looked out at Newman's Ridge, where the afternoon sun was turning the snow-covered peaks gold and red, somewhere up there, in a place that exists between the world of the living and the world of the dead. 15 Melundian spirits were finally at rest, but their story lives on, carried by people who understand that history isn't just dates and facts. It's pain and hope, and the long struggle to be remembered. Your grandmother was right, I told the young woman. The dead can't speak for themselves. That's our job now. She smiled and pulled out a notebook. Then I guess you'd better tell me everything. So I did, because some stories are too important to die, and some promises are too sacred to be. Riek. And because Martha Redstone, Cherokee, Melundian, park ranger, and keeper of forgotten histories, knows that the past never really stays buried in these ancient mountains. It just waits, patient as stone, for someone brave enough to dig it up and give it voice again. My name is Jeremiah Whitmore, and I've been a park ranger in these Tennessee mountains for 15 years now. Born and raised right here in Cherokee National Forest, learned these hills from my daddy who worked the coal mines before they played out. People always ask me why I never left for the city like most folks my age. Truth is, these mountains are in my blood. Every cave, every ridge, every hollow, I know them like the back of my weathered hands. The Bell Witch Cave sits about 12 miles from the nearest town, deep in a section where most tourists never venture. It's part of a limestone cave system that stretches for miles underground, carved out by centuries of water flow. I've been down in those caves more times than I can count, doing rescue work mostly. When folks get lost or hurt spelunking, they call me. That's my specialty, you see. Cave rescue and geological surveys. Got certified in Nashville back in '52. Learned rappelling and rope work from some of the best. My equipment might not be fancy, carbide headlamp, manila rope, basic first aid kit, but it's reliable. In caves, reliable beats fancy every time. October of 1961 was colder than usual. Early frost had been forming in the cave mouths, making the limestone slippery as glass. I remember thinking it was a bad time for college kids to be poking around underground, but you can't tell young folks anything when they've got adventure on their minds. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 3 students from Vanderbilt University, all experienced spelunkers according to their professor, had gone into Bell Witch Cave 2 days prior and never came out. Their car was still parked at the trailhead, but no sign of them anywhere above ground. Now, I'd heard all the stories about that cave since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. Local legend says it's haunted by the spirit of Kate Batts, the so-called Bell Witchwood. Tormented the Bell family back in the 1800s. Supposedly, she moved her operation to the cave after old John Bell died. Folks claim to hear voices down there, see strange lights, feel cold spots that would freeze you to the bone. I never put much stock in ghost stories. Been in hundreds of caves over the years, and the only spirits I ever encountered came from a bottle. Those old mountain tales were just ways for folks to explain things they didn't understand. Echo chambers, wind patterns, temperature variations. Caves can play tricks on your mind if you let them. But this was different. 3 missing kids meant I had to go down there whether the place gave me the creeps or not. I called for backup from Knoxville and started gathering my gear. Tom Bridgewater, another ranger with 20 years' experience, said he'd drive down with the specialized equipment we might need. Good man, Tom. Steady as a rock, never got rattled by anything. While I waited for Tom, I hiked out to the cave entrance. Something felt wrong from the start, though I couldn't put my finger on what. The woods were too quiet. No bird sounds, no squirrel chatter, nothing. Even the insects had gone silent. In 15 years of ranger work, I'd never experienced silence like that. The cave mouth yawned before me like a hungry throat, darker than it should have been even for late afternoon. I tested my headlamp and checked my rope. Everything looked normal, but that feeling in my gut kept growing stronger. I should have listened to it. Tom arrived just as the sun was setting, hauling a truck full of rescue equipment from Nashville. We set up base camp at the cave entrance and went over our plan. Standard cave rescue protocol: descend together, mark our path, call out every 50 feet. We had enough rope to reach the bottom of the main chamber, plus extra line for emergencies. You ever been in this particular cave before, Jerry? Tom asked as he checked his carbide lamp. Few times over the years, I told him. Mostly just the main passages. It goes deep, but the structure's solid. Limestones. It'd been stable for thousands of years. That's when we found the first sign something was wrong. About 200 feet down the main passage, we came across the missing students' equipment. Not scattered like you'd expect from an accident, but arranged in a perfect circle on the cave floor. Backpacks, ropes, lanterns, even their food supplies, all laid out neat as you please, like someone was setting a table for dinner. That's mighty strange, Tom said, playing his light over the arrangement. Kids wouldn't do this on their own. I knelt down and examined the gear. No damage, no signs of struggle. But the rope had been cut. Not frayed or broken, but sliced clean through with something sharp. Maybe they had equipment failure, I said, though it didn't make sense. Split up to look for another way out. We marked the spot and continued deeper. The main passage sloped downward at a steady angle, carved smooth by centuries of water flow. Our lights revealed limestone formations that looked like frozen waterfalls, beautiful in their strange way. But something was off about the cave's atmosphere. For one thing, it was cold. Not the usual cool temperature you'd expect underground, but genuinely cold. Cold enough that our breath started misting, which shouldn't happen in October. Cold enough that ice was forming on the cave walls in delicate, impossible patterns. Temperature's dropping, Tom observed, pulling his jacket tighter. Feels like winter down here. That's when we heard it. A sound like whispering, echoing from deeper in the cave. Soft at first, then growing clearer as we stood still and listened. It sounded like a woman's voice, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. The acoustics in caves can do funny things, carry sounds from miles away or make drops of water sound like footsteps. But this was different. This sounded like someone talking right behind us. Tom and I looked at each other. Could be one of the kids, he said hopefully. Maybe injured, calling for help. We followed the voice deeper into the cave system, down passages I'd explored before, but that somehow felt unfamiliar now. The whispering grew louder, and I started to make out individual words. Old-fashioned speech, the kind you might hear in historical movies. "Get out," the voice seemed to say. "Get out before it's too late." But maybe I was imagining it. Maybe the cold and the strange atmosphere were getting to me. Then we found the scratches. Fresh gouges in the limestone wall, letters carved deep into rock that should have taken hours to cut with proper tools. But these looked like they'd been clawed out by fingernails, and they spelled out a clear message: "Get out." "Someone's playing games with us," Tom said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence, trying to scare us off. We kept going, following the main passage toward the deepest chamber. My rope felt different as I played it out, rougher, like it was being worn down by something. When I stopped to check it, I saw strands starting to fray in multiple spots, fresh cuts as if an invisible blade was slicing through the fibers. That's when our radios started acting up. Nothing but static at first, then weird sounds coming through the interference. Laughter, high-pitched and manic, definitely a woman's voice. I tried calling back to base camp, but the static got worse. Through the noise, I could swear I heard someone saying, "They're mine now. They belong to me now." Tom was about 50 feet ahead when he called back, "Jerry, you need to see this." I hurried forward and found him standing at the edge of a vertical drop-off. The main chamber opened up here, our lights barely reaching the bottom. But what made my blood run cold wasn't the depth. It was what Tom's light had picked out on the cave floor, below. A body. One of the missing students lying in an impossible position at the base of the chamber. Even from this distance, I could see the expression of absolute terror frozen on his face. No visible wounds, no signs of what had killed him. Just pure, overwhelming fear that had stopped his heart. "We need to get down there," I said, though every instinct screamed against it. "Check for survivors." Tom was already rigging his rappelling gear when it happened. One moment he was clipping into his harness, the next he was falling. Not the way someone falls when they lose their balance. This was like he'd been pushed hard by invisible hands. I lunged forward, but it was too late. Tom plummeted into the darkness below, his scream echoing off the cave walls. When I played my light down, I saw his rope hanging slack beside him, cut clean through, just like the student's gear. And that's when I heard her laugh. Not through the radio static this time, but right there in the cave with me. Clear as day, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I was alone in Bell Witch Cave, and something wanted me dead. The laughter died away, leaving me in the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I called down to Tom, praying for an answer, but only heard my own voice bouncing back from the limestone walls. My hands shook as I checked my equipment, double-checking every knot and clip. That's when she spoke to me directly for the first time. "Well, well, little Jeremiah Whitmore." The voice came from right beside my ear, though nothing was there when I spun around. "All grown up now, aren't you? But still carrying that guilt like a stone in your pocket." I knew that voice, though I'd never heard it before. Knew it the way you know your own name, the way you recognize your mother's face. It was old and bitter and full of a hatred that went deeper than death. "You're not real," I said aloud, though my voice cracked like a teenager's. Just cave echoes and cold air. Her laughter filled the chamber again, and this time I felt it as much as heard it, a vibration that seemed to come from inside my own chest. "Real enough to know about Sarah," the voice hissed. "Real enough to know how you caught her with Tom Henderson in your own bed. Real enough to know you blame yourself for not being the husband she needed." My blood went cold, and not from the cave's unnatural chill. Nobody knew about Sarah and Tom, about the divorce, about the guilt that ate at me every night. I'd never told a soul the real reason my marriage failed. "How do you—" "I know because I feed on it, boy. Guilt and regret and all those delicious negative emotions that keep people awake at night. You've got more than most, and it's been calling to me for months now." The temperature dropped another 20 degrees. Ice crystals started forming on my jacket, and stalactites began growing downward from the ceiling at an impossible speed. In minutes, they'd formed sharp icicles pointing directly at me like accusing fingers. I needed to get down to Tom and the students, but my rope couldn't be trusted. Instead, I found a side passage that spiraled downward in a gentler slope. My carbide flame kept flickering, changing from yellow to blue and back again. In the unstable light, shadows danced on the cave walls like living things. The passage opened into a lower chamber, and that's where I found Tom. He wasn't dead, but he might as well have been. Something had arranged his body on a natural stone formation, arms spread wide like a crucifixion. A stalactite had punched clean through his chest, but there wasn't much blood. His eyes were wide open, staring at nothing, and his lips moved in a constant whisper I couldn't understand. "Tom!" I knelt beside him, checking for a pulse. Still alive, but barely. "Tom, can you hear me?" He turned his head toward me with tremendous effort. "She showed me things, Jerry," he whispered. "Things about my life, my mistakes. She made me watch it all again." "Who showed you? Who did this?" "Kate Batts, the Bell Witch. She's been waiting down here for over 100 years, waiting for people like us. People with guilt to feed on." His grip on my arm was surprisingly strong. "She's coming for you next." That's when I heard footsteps. Not the sound of boots on stone, but something softer, like bare feet walking across the cave floor, though I couldn't see anyone in the beam of my headlamp. The footsteps circled around me, getting closer with each pass. The air grew so cold I could barely breathe, and my light started dimming as if something was draining the carbide fuel. Then I saw her. Not all at once, but gradually, like someone slowly turning up a gas lamp. First, just an outline in the darkness, then more solid, more real. A woman in a tattered dress that might have been white once, but was now the color of old bones. Her hair hung in long, wet tangles around a face that had been beautiful before. Death twisted it into something horrible. Kate Batts, the Bell Witch herself. Her eyes glowed with a sickly red light, and when she smiled, I saw too many teeth. "There you are, Jeremiah. I've been so looking forward to our conversation." She raised her hand, and I felt an invisible force grab my throat, not strangling, just holding me in place while she spoke. "Do you want to know what really happened to those students? They came down here full of excitement and scientific curiosity. But when I showed them their futures, all the ways they would fail and disappoint the people they loved, well, the first one's heart just stopped from the shock. The other two tried to run." With a gesture, she pointed to the far corner of the chamber. 2 more bodies lay there, the missing students. But they weren't dead. Not quite. Like Tom, they were trapped in some state between life and death, their eyes wide with terror, lips moving in silent screams. "They're still conscious, you know," Kate said conversationally, "still aware of everything happening to them. The cold is slowly freezing them from the inside out. They'll last another hour or 2 before their brains finally shut down." The grip on my throat tightened. "But you're different, aren't you, Jeremiah? You've got so much guilt stored up, so much delicious self-hatred. I could feed on you for years." She was right, and we both knew it. The divorce, the failed marriage, the way I'd buried myself in work to avoid dealing with my emotions, it all came flooding back with perfect, painful clarity. Every harsh word I'd spoken to Sarah, every night I'd chosen overtime instead of coming home, every opportunity I'd missed to be the man she needed. Kate's smile grew wider. "Yes, that's it. Let it all wash over you. Feel every moment of failure, every instance where you chose duty over love, work over family. Feel how much you deserve this." But then something inside me rebelled. Maybe it was 15 years of cave rescues, of refusing to give up when people needed help. Maybe it was just stubborn mountain pride. Whatever it was, I found my voice again. "No," I said. "I made mistakes, but I don't deserve to die for them." Kate's expression shifted from triumph to rage in an instant. The invisible grip released my throat, but now the entire cave began to shake. Rocks fell from the ceiling, and I heard the grinding sound of stone shifting under enormous pressure. "You think you can fight me?" she shrieked. I've been here since before your grandfather was born. I've fed on the guilt of 1,000 souls. The cave kept shaking, getting worse by the second. If I didn't get out soon, the whole system would collapse and bury us all. But I couldn't leave Tom and the students to die. That's when I realized what I had to do. The cave system groaned around us like a living thing in pain. Kate floated above the underground stream that ran through the deepest chamber, her form becoming more solid and terrible with each passing moment. The red glow from her eyes cast everything in hellish light, and the temperature had dropped so far that my breath came out in thick clouds of vapor. "You want to save them?" she taunted, gesturing at Tom and the students. "Then feed me what I need. Open yourself up to all that guilt, all that shame you've been carrying around. Let me taste every moment you failed as a husband." The terrible thing was, part of me wanted to do it. The guilt over my marriage had been eating me alive for 2 years. Maybe if I gave it to her, if I let her consume all that self-hatred, I'd finally find peace. But looking at Tom's tortured face, at those 2 students trapped between life and death, I knew that wasn't the answer. Kate didn't want to free me from guilt. She wanted to trap me with it forever. "I failed my marriage," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I chose work over Sarah, duty over love. I wasn't the husband she needed, and our relationship died because of it." Kate's eyes brightened with hunger. "Yes, that's it. More. But I'm not the only one to blame," I continued. "Sarah made choices too. She chose to have an affair instead of talking to me about our problems. She chose to betray our vows rather than fight for what we had." The witch's expression began to change. The eager hunger shifted to something like confusion. "I made mistakes, but I don't have to carry all the responsibility for both of us," I said, feeling something heavy lift from my chest. "I can learn from what went wrong without hating myself for the rest of my life." "No!" Kate shrieked. "You don't understand. The guilt is what feeds me, what keeps me strong. Without it, I'm nothing." And that's when I finally understood. She wasn't just feeding on guilt. She was made of it. All that hatred and bitterness and self-blame from the people she'd tormented over the decades had formed her into something beyond human. But if someone could let go of their guilt, really and truly release it, she would lose her power over them. "I forgive myself," I said. "For the first time in 2 years, I forgive myself." Kate's scream shook the entire cave system. Her form began to waver, becoming less solid, as if she was being torn apart by invisible winds. "You can't. No one ever forgives themselves. They always hold on to the pain." "Not me," I said. "Not anymore." But she wasn't finished. As her human form dissolved, something much worse took its place. The cave itself seemed to come alive, stalactites reaching down like grasping fingers, the floor tilting and buckling under my feet. She was using the entire limestone structure as her body now, turning the cave into a weapon. A section of ceiling collapsed, missing me by inches. The underground stream began to rise, flooding the lower chamber where Tom and the students lay helpless. If I didn't act fast, we'd all drown or be crushed. I remembered something my daddy had taught me about the old mining operations. These limestone caves were riddled with abandoned shafts and blast holes from when they'd tried to mine coal in the 1920s. Some of those old charges might still be viable if I could find them. Fighting my way through the collapsing cave, I found what I was looking for, a cache of mining supplies left behind decades ago. The dynamite was old and dangerous, but it was our only chance. I rigged 3 charges at strategic points where the limestone looked weakest, creating what I hoped would be a new exit tunnel. Kate's voice filled the cave, no longer human, but like the sound of grinding stone. "I'll bury you all. If I can't feed on you, you'll die here with me." The water was rising fast. Tom and the students were already half submerged, and I could see them struggling weakly against their supernatural bonds. Whatever Kate was doing to keep them trapped was finally starting to weaken as her form dissolved. I lit the fuses and ran. The explosion was like the end of the world. Rock shattered, water rushed, and for a moment, I thought I'd miscalculated and brought the whole mountain down on our heads. But when the dust cleared, There was a new opening in the cave wall. Not large, but big enough for a person to crawl through. Kate's final scream echoed through the chamber as her power finally broke. Tom and the students suddenly went limp, freed from whatever had been holding them. The supernatural cold began to lift, and the rising water started to drain through new cracks in the floor. I dragged Tom to the opening first, then went back for the students. They were unconscious but breathing, their pulses steady. Whatever Kate had done to them was finally wearing off. One by one, I hauled them through the narrow tunnel I'd blasted. It led to a natural chimney that came up near the main cave entrance, a route that had probably been there all along, hidden by Kate's influence. We emerged into the sweetest October night I'd ever experienced. Clean air, stars overhead, and the blessed sound of normal forest noises returning as Kate's presence faded from the cave below. The official report blamed the deaths on geological instability. Cave-in, they said. Tragic accident. The surviving students spent 2 weeks in the psychiatric ward at Vanderbilt, and when they were released, they never spoke about what happened underground. Not to their families, not to the investigators, not to anyone. Tom recovered from his physical injuries, but he transferred to a different district. Said these mountains held too many bad memories now. I understood, though I couldn't bring myself to leave. These hills were still my home, still in my blood. The Bell Witch Cave system was permanently closed to the public. I made sure of that, pulling every string I had with the Forest Service. Officially, it was due to unstable rock formations that posed a safety hazard. The real reason would never appear in any government file. But the strange thing was, what happened to me after that night? The guilt that had been eating me alive for 2 years was simply gone. Not forgotten. I still remembered my mistakes, still regretted the pain I'd caused. But the crushing weight of self-hatred had lifted. For the first time since my divorce, I could think about Sarah without wanting to crawl into a bottle. 6 months later, I started dating again. Mary Thompson, the local school teacher, had been trying to get my attention for years. Turned out she was worth the wait. I installed seismic monitoring equipment around the sealed cave entrance, ostensibly to watch for further geological instability. What it really monitored were the strange readings that showed up every few months: temperature fluctuations, unusual vibrations, electromagnetic anomalies that had no scientific explanation. Kate Batts was still down there, but weakened. Without a steady diet of human guilt and regret to sustain her, she was slowly fading back to whatever dark corner of existence she'd crawled out of. The equipment let me know if she ever started growing strong again, but I wasn't too worried. See, the thing about guilt is that it only has power over you if you let it. Kate fed on people who couldn't forgive themselves, who carried their mistakes like stones in their pockets until the weight dragged them down. Once you learn to let go of that burden, to accept responsibility without drowning in self-hatred, spirits like her lose their hold on you. The mountains are quiet now, peaceful in a way they hadn't been for decades. Hikers report feeling welcomed instead of watched, and the wildlife has returned to the areas around the cave. Sometimes I'll catch a glimpse of deer grazing near the sealed entrance, completely unafraid. But I still check those monitoring readings every day. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling through the hollers, I think I can hear her voice carried on the air. Weak now, barely a whisper, but still there. "I'm waiting," she seems to say. "I'm always waiting." Let her wait. So, places in these mountains are older than our understanding, older than our science, older than our ability to explain. But they're not stronger than our ability to grow, to forgive, to move beyond the mistakes that would otherwise define us. The Bell Witch's Hollow is quiet now, but I know it's not empty. It never will be. That's why I stay, why I keep watch, why I'll never leave these mountains I love. Because somebody has to stand guard against the darkness that feeds on human weakness. And somebody has to be ready to help the next person who wanders too deep into the places where old guilt goes to hide. My name is Jeremiah Whitmore, and I've been a park ranger in these Tennessee mountains for 15 years now. These hills are in my blood, and some responsibilities you just don't walk away from, even when they scare you more than death itself. My name is Vincent Holbrook, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. I work in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, where the hills roll green and thick with trees that have seen more history than most people ever will. I know these mountains better than most folks know their own backyard. My family's been digging coal out of these hills for 4 generations. My great-grandfather started it, then my grandfather, then my dad. They all went down into the dark every morning and came back up covered in black dust every night. Until my dad didn't come back up. He died in a mine collapse when I was 23. That's when I decided the coal business and I were done with each other. I became a park ranger instead. Figured I'd rather protect the mountains than tear holes in them. But you can't really escape the mines around here. They're everywhere under our feet, like a giant maze of tunnels that nobody talks about anymore. Most are sealed up tight, welded shut, and forgotten. The companies took their money and left us with the holes. The worst one is the old Blackstone mining operation. That place has been shut down since 1952 after an explosion killed 127 miners. They sealed it up so fast that some folks say the company didn't even bother to get all the bodies out first. Just welded the doors and walked away. People around here have always said the Blackstone mine is haunted. They talk about hearing voices down there or seeing lights moving around in tunnels that should be pitch black. I used to laugh at that stuff. Mine ghosts were just methane gas making miners hallucinate. I'd tell anyone who'd listen. I don't laugh about it anymore. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in March. Spring rains had been falling for 3 days straight, turning every creek into a river and every low spot into a swamp. I was drinking coffee in the ranger station, Wotios. Then the phone rang. 4 teenagers went missing last night, Sheriff Coleman told me. Their parents say they were talking about exploring some old mine. You know anything about kids getting into the sealed ones? My stomach dropped. Please tell me they didn't try the Blackstone mine. That's exactly what I was afraid you'd say. I grabbed my gear and drove out to the site. The Blackstone mine sits in a hollow about 12 miles from the main road, back where the trees grow so thick that noon looks like evening. When the mining company abandoned it, nature started taking it back. Now you can barely see the old buildings through all the vines and saplings. The main entrance is still there, though, a big concrete wall with metal doors welded shut so tight you'd need a blowtorch to get through. But kids are clever and desperate to prove they're braver than they really are. I found their car first, a beat-up Honda parked behind the old company office. Then I saw the footprints in the mud, leading away from the sealed entrance and up the hillside. That's when I realized what they'd done. These kids had found one of the old air shafts. Every mine has them. Vertical shafts that were supposed to bring fresh air down to the workers. Most are covered over or filled in, but some are just hidden by years of brush and fallen trees. If you knew what to look for, you could find one. If you were stupid enough, you could climb down into it. I followed the footprints until I found it. A hole in the ground about 4 feet across, with a rusty metal ladder bolted to one side. Somebody had cleared away the branches and brush. Fresh rope was tied to a tree nearby. I called down into the hole. Hello? Can anybody hear me? Nothing came back but my own echo. I've been in a lot of dangerous places as a ranger. I've pulled people off cliff faces and out of flooded rivers. But staring down into that black hole, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I was scared. I called for the mine rescue team, but they were dealing with flooding problems on the other side of the county. It would be at least 4 hours before they could get to me. 4 hours that those kids might not have. I put on my safety gear, hard hat, gas detector, emergency breathing mask. The battery-powered lamp clipped to my helmet cast a yellow circle of light that seemed pathetically small against all that darkness. The ladder was older than I was, but it held my weight as I climbed down. The air shaft dropped about 60 feet straight down, then opened into a horizontal tunnel. My gas detector was beeping softly, showing safe levels, but warning me to stay alert. The tunnel was just like the ones from my childhood, when Dad would sometimes take me to see where he worked. Low ceiling, wooden support beams, cart tracks running down the middle. But something felt wrong about this place. It was too cold. Even 60 feet underground, it should have been warmer than this. My breath was coming out in little puffs of steam, and I could feel the chill right through my jacket. I followed the cart tracks deeper into the mine. Every few steps, I called out for the missing teenagers. My voice sounded small and strange in the tunnels, like the mountain was swallowing the words before they could travel very far. That's when I found the first piece of their equipment. It was a flashlight, one of those big heavy ones you get at the hardware store. It was lying next to the cart tracks, still turned on, but dim. The battery was almost dead. I picked it up and checked it over. No damage, no sign that it had been dropped in a panic. It was just sitting there like somebody had set it down carefully and walked away. But why would you leave your only light source in a place like this? I kept walking, following the tracks deeper into the mine. My lamp beam picked up more pieces of equipment. A backpack here, a water bottle there. It was like the kids had been dropping things as they walked, leaving a trail, or like something had been taking things from them. The tunnel curved to the right, and I found myself in a larger chamber. This was where the miners would have loaded coal into carts to haul it back to the surface. Wooden support posts held up the ceiling, and smaller tunnels branched off in 3 different directions. My gas detector started beeping faster. The readings were climbing, not dangerous yet, but higher than they should be. Methane gas builds up in old mines, and if it gets concentrated enough, one spark can turn the whole place into a bomb. That's when I heard the tapping. It was coming from one of the side tunnels, a steady rhythm like somebody hitting metal with a hammer. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. I knew that sound. Every kid who grew up around the mines knew it. It was the signal miners used when they were trapped, tapping on pipes or rails to let the rescue teams know where they were. One of the kids was alive, and they were calling for help. I followed the sound into the left tunnel. This one was narrower, with a lower ceiling that made me duck my head as I walked. The tapping got louder as I went deeper. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. The tunnel ended at a wall of fallen rock and timbers, a cave-in, probably decades old. But the tapping was coming from the other side. "Hello?" I shouted. "Can you hear me? I'm here to help you." The tapping stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then I heard a voice, muffled but clear. "Help us! We're trapped!" It was a young man's voice, scared but trying to sound brave. One of the missing teenagers. "I'm going to get you out of here," I called back. "But I need you to move away from the wall. I'm going to try to clear some of these rocks." I set down my equipment and started pulling stones away from the pile. Some of them were huge, too big for one person to move easily, but I was desperate to reach those kids before the methane levels got any worse. As I worked, I kept talking to the voice on the other side. "What's your name? How many of you are there? Is anybody hurt?" But the voice didn't answer my questions. It just kept saying the same thing, over and over. "Help us. We're trapped." After 20 minutes of moving rocks, I managed to clear a small gap near the top of the pile. I shone my light through it, trying to see into the space beyond. What I saw didn't make sense. The chamber on the other side was full of coal carts. Old wooden carts lined up in neat rows, like somebody had been organizing them. But these carts should have been rotted to pieces after 30 years. Instead, they looked almost new. And they were full of coal, fresh black coal that should have been mined out decades ago. "Where are you?" I called through the gap. "I can see the room, but I don't see you." The voice came back, closer this time. "Help us. We're trapped." But as my light swept across the chamber, I realized something that made my blood turn cold. The voice wasn't coming from inside the room, it was coming from right behind me. I spun around, my lamp beam cutting through the darkness of the tunnel. Nothing there, just empty space and the cart tracks leading back the way I'd come. "Hello?" I called out. "Who's there?" Silence. I stood there for a long minute, my heart hammering in my chest. The gas detector was beeping steadily now, showing levels that were getting close to dangerous. I needed to get out of this tunnel and find another way to reach the kids. As I gathered up my equipment, I heard something that made me freeze. Footsteps. Heavy boots walking on stone, coming from deeper in the mine. But that was impossible. I was the only person down here, And the teenagers were trapped on the other side of the cave-in, weren't they? The footsteps got closer. I could hear them clearly now. The steady rhythm of someone walking with purpose, not hurrying but not hesitant either. Like someone who knew these tunnels better than I did. Called out, "Who's there? This is Ranger Holbrook. Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. Then I heard something worse than footsteps. I heard voices. Multiple voices, talking quietly among themselves. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was familiar. It was the sound of men discussing work, the way miners always talked when they were deciding how to tackle a tough job. But there shouldn't be any miners down here. There hadn't been any miners down here for 30 years. I backed away from the voices, heading toward the main chamber. My lamp beam danced wildly as my hands shook, casting crazy shadows on the tunnel walls. The gas detector was beeping faster now, showing readings that meant I was in real danger. When I reached the main chamber, I stopped and tried to think clearly. Gas buildup could cause hallucinations. Maybe that's all this was. Maybe the methane was making me hear things that weren't really there. But when I looked around the chamber, I saw something that definitely wasn't a hallucination. There was a teenager lying next to one of the cart tracks. I ran over to him. He was a boy, maybe 17 years old, wearing jeans and a concert t-shirt. His eyes were closed, and for a terrible moment I thought he was dead. Then I saw his chest moving up and down. He was breathing, but something was wrong with him. His skin was gray and cold to the touch, and when I checked his pulse, it was so slow and weak that I could barely find it. It was like he was in some kind of coma. "Can you hear me?" I asked, shaking his shoulder gently. "What's your name? What happened to you?" His eyes opened, but they didn't focus on me. They stared straight up at the ceiling, and when he spoke, his voice was flat and strange. "We have to get back to work," he said. "The foreman doesn't like it when we're late." "Work? What work? You're not supposed to be down here." "The coal won't mine itself," he said in that same empty voice. "We have quotas to meet." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold air. This kid was talking like he was a miner. But he was just a teenager from town, probably never been in a mine in his life. I tried to lift him up, to carry him back to the air shaft, but he was heavier than he should have been, much heavier, and when I managed to get him sitting up, I saw something that made me stumble backward. His clothes were covered in coal dust, fresh coal dust, like he'd been working in the mine for hours. "We have to get back to work," he said again, and tried to stand up. That's when the lights appeared. Down the tunnel where I'd heard the voices, I could see lamps coming toward us. Miners' lamps, the old-fashioned kind with the carbide flames. They bobbed up and down as the people carrying them walked, casting moving shadows on the tunnel walls. I counted at least 6 lights, maybe more. They were coming from all 3 tunnels that led off the main chamber, converging on where I stood with the unconscious teenager. And I could hear them talking now, clear as day. "New man doesn't know the rules yet. Boss won't like it if he doesn't pull his weight. Maybe we should show him how the job gets done." The voices were wrong somehow. They sounded hollow, like they were coming from very far away. And they were using old-fashioned words, the kind of language my grandfather might have used. I grabbed the teenager under the arms and started dragging him toward the air shaft. He was mumbling about work quotas and shift changes, but he wasn't fighting me anymore. It was like he was sleepwalking. The lights got closer. I could almost make out the shapes of the people carrying them now. Men in work clothes and mining helmets, walking with the steady pace of people who had done this job for years. But their faces were all wrong. Too pale, too thin, and their eyes were just dark holes. I reached the bottom of the air shaft and looked up. 60 feet of rusty ladder between me and safety. No way I could carry an unconscious teenager up that distance. Behind me, the miners were getting closer. I could hear their boots on the stone floor, the creak of their leather belts, the soft hiss of their carbide lamps. "Time to get to work," one of them said, and his voice was so close it sounded like he was standing right next to me. I looked back and saw him. A man in his 40s, wearing the kind of work clothes miners wore in the 1950s. His face was gray as ash, and when he smiled at me, I could see that his teeth were stained black with coal dust. "You look just like your daddy," he said. That's when I realized I recognized him. Even with that horrible gray face, even with those dead black eyes, I knew who he was. It was my father. "Dad?" The word came out as barely a whisper. The thing that looked like my father nodded slowly. Up close, I could see the details that made my stomach turn. His work clothes were torn and burned like he'd been caught in an explosion. There was coal dust ground so deep into his skin that it looked like part of him, and his eyes were empty holes that seemed to go on forever. "Been waiting for you, Vincent," he said. "Knew you'd come down here eventually. Coal mining's in your blood, son. Can't fight what you are." "You're dead," I said, backing against the ladder. "You died in a cave-in 15 years ago." "Did I?" He tilted his head, and I heard something in his neck crack like old wood. "Funny thing about dying in the mines, boy. Sometimes you just keep working. Can't stop working. The company won't let you." More miners appeared behind him, dozens of them, carrying those flickering carbide lamps. Some looked like they'd been burned in explosions. Others were crushed or mangled. All of them had that same gray skin and those same empty eyes. "We died here in 1952, my father said. Explosion in the deep. Tunnels. Company knew the gas levels were dangerous, but they made us work anyway. Said we were behind on our quotas." "The Blackstone explosion," I whispered. "You weren't even working. Here then. You worked for Mountain Coal Company." He laughed, but it sounded like wind blowing through a broken pipe. "Death doesn't care about company boundaries, son. All the miners who died in these hills end up in the same place, and we all have the same job to do." "What job?" "Mining coal for the company that killed us. Forever and ever, until somebody makes it right." I looked around at the other miners. There were so many of them now that their lamps lit up the whole chamber. Men who had died in cave-ins, gas explosions, equipment accidents, decades of industrial murder, all gathered in one place. "The teenagers," I said. "Where are the other teenagers?" My father pointed down one of the side tunnels. "They're learning the trade, just like you're going to learn." "I'm not staying down here." "Oh, but you are." His face got serious, and suddenly he looked more like the father I remembered. "See, we figured out the secret, Vincent. The company buried the evidence of what they did to us. Safety reports, gas readings, maintenance records, all of it got sealed up with our bodies. But if somebody could get that evidence to the surface, the families could sue them. Justice, son, that's all we want. Justice for what they did to us." I understood now. "You want me to find the evidence. It's in the deep tunnels where the explosion happened. But here's the thing. You go down there, you might not come back up. The gas levels are deadly, and the tunnels could collapse any second." I looked at the unconscious teenager lying beside the ladder. "What about the kids?" "They're part of us now, working the coal face just like we do. They'll be fine as long as they keep working. But if they stop—" He made a gesture like something breaking. The choice was clear. I could climb up that ladder and call for help, but by the time the rescue teams got here, those teenagers would be dead. Or I could go into the deep tunnels and try to find the evidence that would give these miners the justice they'd been waiting for. Either way, I might not survive. "If I do this," I said, "if I find your evidence, you'll let the kids go?" My father nodded. "Dead men keep their promises, Vincent. It's about the only thing we can still do." I made my decision. I picked up my equipment and followed the ghost miners into the deepest tunnel. The gas detector was screaming now, showing readings that meant one spark could turn this whole place into a fireball. But the miners' carbide lamps flickered all around me, and somehow nothing exploded. The tunnel sloped downward, taking us deeper into the mountain. The walls here were different, newer somehow, like they'd been carved recently. But that was impossible. This mine had been abandoned for 30 years. "We keep digging," my father explained as we walked, "looking for the evidence, creating new tunnels, new chambers. Death doesn't stop the work." We reached a large chamber that must have been the original blast site. The walls were blackened and cracked, and I could see the twisted remains of mining equipment scattered around. In one corner, there was a pile of old file cabinets and metal boxes. Company records, my father said. Everything they didn't want anybody to see. I opened one of the file cabinets. Inside were dozens of folders filled with documents. Safety inspection reports showing dangerous gas levels. Maintenance requests that were denied to save money. Memos discussing how to hide violations from the government inspectors. It was all there. Proof that the Blackstone Mining Company had knowingly sent 127 men to their deaths to save a few dollars. But as I gathered up the documents, I heard something that made my blood freeze. The sound of creaking timbers. The mine was starting to collapse. "Time to go, son," my father said. "Place has been held together by willpower and anger for 30 years. Now that we got what we came for, it's ready to fall down." We ran back through the tunnels as the mountain came apart around us. Support beams snapped like toothpicks. Rocks fell from the ceiling. The cart tracks buckled and twisted under our feet. Behind us, I could hear the other miners laughing. They sounded happy for the first time since I'd met them. We reached the main chamber just as the ceiling started to give way. The unconscious teenager was still lying by the ladder. But now there were 3 more kids with him. All of them had that same gray skin and empty expression. "Take them with you," my father said. "They've served their time." I don't know how I did it, but somehow I got all 4 teenagers up that ladder. Maybe the ghost miners helped push from below. Maybe adrenaline gave me strength I didn't know I had. But one by one, I hauled them up the air shaft and out into the daylight. When the last kid was safe on the surface, I looked back down the shaft. My father was standing at the bottom, looking up at me. "Thank you, son," he said. "Now we can rest." The air shaft collapsed with a sound like thunder. The whole hillside shook, and trees fell over as the ground caved in. When the dust settled, there was no sign that the mine entrance had ever existed. The teenagers recovered completely, with no memory of what had happened to them underground. They remembered exploring the mine entrance, but everything after that was a blank. The doctors said it was shock and hypothermia, and I didn't argue with them. The documents I brought up from the mine were exactly what the families needed. Lawyers filed lawsuits against what was left of the Blackstone Mining Company, and after 30 years, the victims' families finally got some kind of justice. A memorial plaque was installed at the site where the mine used to be. It lists all 127 names of the miners who died in the 1952 explosion. My father's name isn't on it. He died in a different mine, in a different year. But somehow I think he's at peace now anyway. I still work as a park ranger in the Melundian National Forest, but I stay away from the old mining areas now. There are too many holes in these hills, too many places where angry dead men might still be working. Sometimes, late at night, I can hear the sound of pickaxes echoing through the mountains. Other rangers tell me it's just the wind, or maybe rocks settling in the old tunnels. But I know better. I know that some debts can only be paid by the truth, no matter how long it takes. And I know that the mountains of West Virginia hold more secrets than most people could ever imagine. The coal companies took their profits and left us with the holes. But they didn't just leave holes in the ground. They left holes in the world itself, places where the past and present mix together like coal dust and methane gas, dangerous combinations that can explode without warning. I've seen what happens when those explosions occur. I've looked into the empty eyes of men who died for somebody else's money. I've heard their voices calling from tunnels that shouldn't exist. And I've learned that sometimes the dead don't stay buried. They just keep digging. My name is Augustus Fairchild, but everyone calls me Gus. I've been a ranger in these Smoky Mountains for 19 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these old hills could throw at me. Bears, drunk tourists, illegal stills, lost hikers, you name it. But nothing prepared me for what happened in the summer of 1957. It started on a Tuesday morning in late August. The air was thick and heavy, the kind that makes your shirt stick to your back before you even start walking. I was drinking coffee at the ranger station when Reverend Thomas came rushing in, his face white as Sunday sheets. "Ranger Fairchild," he said, breathing hard like he'd run the whole way from town. "I need your help. It's my daughter, Mary Catherine. She's been missing for 3 days." I set down my coffee and grabbed my notebook. Missing persons were serious business, especially young women. Mary Catherine was 19. I knew her from town. Pretty girl with dark hair and a rebellious streak that worried her father. Where was she last seen? I asked. She said she was going hiking up near Cataract Falls, wanted to see the old ruins up there. The Reverend's hands shook as he spoke. But Ranger Fairchild, there's something else. Something strange. I raised an eyebrow. Strange how? Jake Morrison came to see me yesterday. You know Jake, runs moonshine up in the hills. He said he's been hearing things at night. Devil sounds, he called them. Chanting and screaming coming from up near the falls. I almost smiled. Jake Morrison was known for his wild stories, especially after sampling his own product. Reverend, you know how Jake gets when he's been... This is different, the Reverend cut me off. Jake was sober as a judge when he told me. Said he's too scared to go back up there. And Jake Morrison ain't scared of nothing. That got my attention. Jake had served in the Pacific during the war, same as me. If something spooked him enough to come to town, it was worth checking out. I packed my gear, compass, flashlight, first aid kit, my service pistol from the war, and enough supplies for 2 days. The hike to Cataract Falls would take most of the morning, and the ruins were another 2 hours beyond that. The trail started normal enough. Birds singing, squirrels chattering, the usual forest sounds. But as I climbed higher, things got quieter. By the time I reached the falls, I realized I hadn't heard a bird in over an hour. The falls themselves looked wrong somehow. The water that usually ran clear and fast was dark and sluggish. It smelled funny too. Not the clean mountain smell I was used to, but something sour and rotten. I followed the old trail that led to the ruins. Back in the 1800s, there had been a small settlement up here. Most folks said it was just poor mountain families trying to scratch out a living, but the old-timers told different stories. They said it was a place where devil worshippers came to do their dark work. The ruins were just old stone foundations now, covered in moss and vines, but as I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the center of the largest foundation, someone had cleared away all the vegetation. The stones were arranged in a perfect circle, and in the middle was a flat rock that looked like an altar. Dark stains covered its surface, stains that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Around the altar, animal bones were arranged in the shape of a 5-pointed star. Deer skulls, bird bones, what looked like a bear's paw. Black candle stubs sat at each point of the star, and the whole area reeked of sulfur. But what really got to me was Mary Catherine's Bible. I found it torn apart, its pages scattered around the altar like confetti. Some of the pages were burned, others had strange symbols drawn on too, hem in what looked like blood. I knelt down and touched one of the bones. It was warm, even though the sun barely reached through the thick trees. The temperature around the altar felt at least 20 degrees colder than the rest of the clearing. That's when I heard it, a low humming sound like voices chanting in the distance. I stood up fast and looked around, but I was alone. The humming stopped as soon as I moved. I pulled out my compass to get my bearings, but the needle was spinning like a child's top. My flashlight flickered on and off even though the batteries were fresh. Something was very wrong here. Very wrong indeed. I spent the rest of that day searching the area around the ruins. I found footprints, lots of them, leading in and out of the clearing. Some were from boots, others were bare feet. A few looked like they might belong to Mary Catherine based on the size. The prints led deeper into the mountains, toward areas where few people ever went. I followed them as far as I could before dark, marking my path with strips of cloth tied to branches. That night I camped about a mile from the ruins. I built a small fire and tried to eat some beans from a can, but I kept hearing things in the darkness, whispers that might have been wind through the trees or might have been something else. The fire kept burning low no matter how much wood I added. Around midnight, the chanting started again. This time it was clear enough that I could tell it wasn't English. It sounded like Latin maybe, but spoken in voices that didn't sound quite human. The sound seemed to come from all around me, echoing off the mountains. I grabbed my flashlight and pistol and headed toward the sound. The beam of light kept dimming, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The chanting got louder as I got closer to the ruins. When I reached the clearing, I saw them. 7 figures in dark robes stood around the altar. Their faces were hidden by deep hoods, and they swayed back and forth as they chanted. In the center of the circle, tied to the altar, was a young woman, Mary Catherine. She was alive but unconscious. The robed figures held candles that burned with an odd blue flame, and the air around them seemed to shimmer like heat waves. I raised my pistol. "Federal Ranger, everyone step away from the girl." The chanting stopped. All 7 figures turned toward me at once, moving in perfect unison. Under their hoods, I saw no faces, just darkness deeper than the night around us. One of them spoke, and its voice was like gravel being poured into a bucket. "You are not welcome here, Augustus Fairchild." It knew my name. How could it know my name? "Let the girl go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Release her now and we can talk about this." The figure that had spoken let out a laugh that made my skin crawl. "She belongs to us now, as do you." That's when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. On the ground around the altar were more bodies. 3 other people, all young, all tied up like Mary Catherine. I recognized one of them, a hiker who'd been reported missing 2 weeks ago. The hooded figures started chanting again, louder this time. The blue flames on their candles grew higher, and the air itself seemed to catch fire. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. Something was moving in the shadows beyond the candlelight. Something big. I fired a shot into the air, hoping to scare them off. The sound echoed through the mountains like thunder, but the robed figures didn't even flinch. If anything, they chanted louder. The thing in the shadow stepped forward. It was tall, taller than any man should be. Its skin was dark red like dried blood, and its eyes glowed like coals in a fireplace. 2 horns curved up from its forehead, and when it smiled, I saw teeth like broken glass. "Welcome, Augustus," it said in a voice like breaking bones. "I have been waiting for you." The creature knew me. It knew my name, and somehow I got the feeling it knew a lot more than that. I fired 3 shots directly at its chest. The bullets passed right through it like it was made of smoke, and it laughed. "Your war taught you to kill men," it said, "but I am no man." Images flashed through my mind. Memories of Germany, of my squad getting torn apart by enemy fire while I hid in a bunker like a coward. The screams of my friends as they died while I did nothing to help them. How could this thing know about that? I'd never told anyone what really happened over there. "Guilt is a powerful thing, Augustus," the creature said, as if reading my thoughts. "It feeds me. And you have so much guilt to offer." The robed figures began moving toward me. Under their hoods, I caught glimpses of faces I recognized, hikers who'd gone missing over the past few months. Their eyes were blank and empty, like nobody was home inside their heads. I backed away from the altar, but I could hear more footsteps in the woods behind me. They had me surrounded. That's when Mary Catherine opened her eyes. Mary Catherine sat up on the altar and looked right at me, but it wasn't really her looking. Her eyes were completely black, like someone had filled them with ink. "Hello, Gus," she said in a voice that wasn't her own. It was deeper, older, and it made the hair on my neck stand up. "We've been waiting for you to join us." The creature with the horns walked closer to the altar. Each step it took left burning footprints in the ground. "This one fought us at first," it said, gesturing toward Mary Catherine, "but now she understands. They all understand eventually." Mary Catherine stood up and walked to the edge of the altar. The ropes that had been holding her down fell away like they were made of paper. "It doesn't hurt anymore, Gus," she said. "The guilt, the pain, the fear, it all goes away when you stop fighting." I kept my gun pointed at the creature, even though I knew it wouldn't do any good. "What are you?" I asked. "I am what your people call a demon," it said simply. "But I prefer to think of myself as a collector. I collect souls that are already broken, already lost, like yours." The thing was right about one thing. I had been carrying around the weight of what happened in Germany for 12 years. Every night I dreamed about my friends dying while I cowered in that bunker. Every day I woke up knowing I was a coward. "I can take that pain away," the demon said, its voice suddenly gentle and kind. "All you have to do is stop fighting. Let me in, and you'll never have to remember Germany again." For just a moment I almost considered it. The idea of not having those nightmares anymore, of not carrying that guilt around like a lead weight. It was tempting. But then I looked at Mary Catherine again, really looked at her. Whatever was inside her now, it wasn't her anymore. The real Mary Catherine, the girl who laughed too loud in church and snuck out to meet boys her father didn't like, she was gone. "I'll pass," I said, and fired another shot at the demon. This time the bullet didn't pass through. It hit the creature in the shoulder, and black blood sprayed out. The demon roared in pain and anger, and the sound was so loud it shook leaves from the trees. "You cannot kill me with your weapons," it snarled, "but I can make you suffer before you die." The demon raised one clawed hand, and suddenly the whole forest was on fire. But this wasn't natural fire. The flames were blue and green and purple, colors fire shouldn't be. They moved wrong too, flowing upward like water instead of dancing like normal flames should. The heat was incredible. I could feel my skin starting to burn even though I was 20 feet away from the nearest flame. The smoke was thick and black and smelled like rotten eggs. "Run if you want," the demon laughed. "The fire will follow you wherever you go." I looked around desperately for an escape route. The supernatural fire was spreading fast, creating a wall of flames around the clearing. But I noticed something. The fire stayed away from the altar where Mary Catherine stood. The demon could control the fire, but it had to protect its prize. I sprinted toward the altar, dodging between the robed figures who tried to grab me. My clothes were smoking from the heat, and I could smell my hair burning. Mary Catherine, or the thing inside her, smiled as I approached. "You're making this much harder than it needs to be, Gus." I grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the edge of the clearing where the fire was thinnest. "I'm getting you out of here." "I don't want to leave," she said, but she didn't resist when I dragged her forward. The demon roared again, and the fire flared higher. I could see my skin starting to blister, and my lungs felt like they were cooking from the inside. We reached the edge of the clearing, and I pushed through the wall of fire. The pain was like nothing I'd ever felt. Worse than being shot, worse than anything that happened in the war. But I kept moving. Once we were past the flames, I expected to feel relief. Instead, I felt the temperature drop again. The demon was following us. "You cannot escape me, Augustus Fairchild," its voice echoed through the trees. "I know where you live. I know where you work. I know everyone you care about." I looked back and saw the creature walking through its own fire like it was a gentle breeze. Behind it came the 7 robed figures, moving in that same unnatural unison. Mary Catherine was starting to struggle in my grip. "Let me go back," she pleaded. "It's better there. No pain, no fear, no guilt." But I held on tight and kept running deeper into the mountains. I knew these hills better than anyone. If I could reach the old mine shaft about 2 miles north, maybe I could find a place to hide and figure out what to do next. Behind us, the demon's laughter followed like thunder rolling down from the peaks. The old mine shaft was exactly where I remembered it. A dark hole cut into the side of the mountain, just big enough for a man to crawl through. I'd explored it as a kid, back when I thought adventure was hiding in dark places instead of hunting you through them. I pushed Mary Catherine ahead of me into the narrow tunnel. She'd stopped talking about going back to the demon, but her eyes were still that horrible black color. Every few minutes she'd turn to look at me, and I could swear I saw something else looking out through her face. The tunnel opened up into a larger cavern about 50 feet in. I'd brought supplies up here years ago. Emergency rations, blankets, and most importantly, a kerosene lantern. My flashlight was dead now, the batteries drained by whatever force surrounded the demon. In the flickering light of the lantern, Mary Catherine looked almost normal again. Almost. "Gus," she said, and for a moment her voice sounded like herself. I can still hear it in my head. It's telling me things. terrible things about you." "What kind of things?" "About the war. About your friends who died. It says you could have saved them, but you chose to save yourself instead." My hands started shaking. The demon had been in my head during the fight, showing me those memories. But how could it know details that I'd never told anyone? "It says if you give up now, it'll let the others go," Mary Catherine continued. "The hikers, the other missing people. It only really wants you." I stared at her. "Why me? What makes me so special?" Mary Catherine's eyes went completely black again, and when she spoke, it was the demon's voice coming out of her mouth. "Because you're already broken, Augustus. Your guilt has been calling to me for 12 years. Every nightmare, every moment you hate yourself for surviving when better men died. It feeds me. You're like a beacon in the darkness." The demon was right about the guilt. I had been carrying it for so long that it felt like part of me. But ring it spoken out loud, I realized something else. "Those men who died," I said slowly, "they weren't better than me. They were just unlucky." The thing wearing Mary Catherine's face hissed, like a snake. "You hid while they fought. I took cover when the shooting started, same as any smart soldier would. The difference is, their cover wasn't good enough." I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. I survived because I made better choices, not because I was a coward. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt like I could breathe properly. The weight I'd been carrying around for 12 years suddenly felt lighter. "You cannot escape your nature," the demon said through Mary Catherine. "You are weak. You are selfish. You are—" "I'm a survivor," I interrupted. "And right now, that's exactly what Mary Catherine needs me to be." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the torn pages from Mary Catherine's Bible that I'd collected at the ruins. Most of them were burned or covered in blood, but a few were still readable. "I don't know much about fighting demons," I said, holding up one of the pages. "But I know this book is supposed to have power over them." Mary Catherine, the demon, laughed. "Superstitious nonsense. Your God has no power here." Maybe not. I'd never been much of a church-going man. But I remembered something my grandmother used to say. Faith isn't about knowing God exists. It's about acting like he does when everything else fails. I started reading from the torn page. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." Mary Catherine screamed. Not a human scream. Something that sounded like metal tearing and glass breaking. Her body convulsed, and she fell to the ground, her back arching unnaturally. I kept reading, louder now. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." Black smoke started pouring out of Mary Catherine's mouth and nose. The smoke formed shapes in the air, twisted faces, clawed hands, things that hurt to look at directly. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." And the cavern started shaking. Rocks fell from the ceiling and the lantern flickered like it was about to go out. But Mary Catherine's eyes were starting to clear, the black fading to brown. "For thou art with me." A sound like thunder filled the cavern, and suddenly the demon was there. Not possessing Mary Catherine, but standing in its full form. 12 feet tall, red skin, burning eyes, and so angry it seemed to glow with its own dark light. "I will not be denied," it roared. I finished the psalm, "And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." The demon lunged at me, claws extended. But instead of running, I stood my ground. This thing fed on fear and guilt and weakness. I'd spent 12 years giving it exactly what it wanted, not anymore. I grabbed the kerosene lantern and smashed it against the demon's chest. The creature caught fire immediately, but not the unnatural blue flames it had used in the forest. These were normal orange flames that burned and consumed. The demon stumbled backward, beating at the flames with its clawed hands. "This is not possible," it gasped. "Maybe not," I said, "but it's happening anyway." The creature's form began to waver and fade. As the flames spread across its body, I could see through it to the cavern wall behind. "I will return, Augustus Fairchild," it whispered as it dissolved into ash and smoke. Your guilt will call to me again. Let it try, I said to the empty air. Mary Catherine was unconscious but breathing normally when I carried her out of the mine shaft. Her eyes had returned to their natural brown color, and when I checked her pulse, it was strong and steady. It took me 2 days to get her back to town. She woke up on the second day but didn't remember anything after leaving for her hike. The doctor said she was dehydrated and exhausted but otherwise fine. The other missing hikers were found wandering those mountains over the next week. None of them remembered where they'd been or what had happened to them. The official report listed them as suffering from exposure and delirium. I went back to the ruins a month later just to make sure. The altar was still there, but the bones and candles were gone. The stones looked old and weathered, like they'd been sitting there for decades instead of being used for dark rituals just weeks before. Jake Morrison never did go back up to that part of the mountains. He moved his still to the other side of the range and told everyone who'd listen that there were things in those hills that were better left alone. I kept working as a ranger for another 8 years. I never saw the demon again, but sometimes, in the darkest part of the night, when the guilt tried to creep back in, I could feel it testing the edges of my mind, looking for a way back in. The difference was, I didn't let it. I started going to church. Not because I suddenly became religious, but because I learned that faith wasn't about believing in something you could prove. It was about choosing to believe in something good when everything around you looked dark. When I retired in 1965, I became a lay preacher in a small mountain church. I never told anyone the whole truth about what happened up at Cataract Falls. Most people wouldn't believe it anyway. But sometimes, when I'm counseling someone who's carrying around guilt that's eating them alive, I tell them what I learned in that mine shaft. The things we regret don't define us unless we let them. And there are always worse things than our own mistakes waiting to take advantage of our weakness. The mountains are still beautiful. Tourists still come to see the waterfalls and hike the trails. Most of them never know how close they came to something that would have destroyed their souls along with their lives. But I know, and I'm still here, still standing guard, still choosing faith over fear every single day, because that's what survivors do. My name is Eleanor Ravenswood, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years. I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know what really happened in the George Washington National Forest in September 1969. The official reports don't tell the whole truth. They can't. I was 41 then, the first woman to become a ranger in our district. Most folks thought I was crazy for wanting to spend my days alone in the woods, but I loved it. I had a degree in anthropology, and these mountains were full of history. Cherokee sacred sites, old burial mounds, stone circles that nobody could explain. The state called me their cultural preservation specialist, which was a fancy way of saying I kept treasure hunters and vandals away from the ancient stuff. The morning it all started, I was checking on a dig site near Lurie Caverns. A team from the University of Virginia had been working there all summer, uncovering what looked like a 2,000-year-old stone circle. Dr. Marcus Webb, the lead archaeologist, was excited about it. He kept saying it was perfectly aligned with the stars, like Stonehenge but smaller. The valley was beautiful that day. Yellow and red leaves were just starting to turn, and the limestone cliffs caught the morning light like they were glowing. You could only reach this place on foot. No roads, no phone lines, nothing but a narrow trail that wound between the rocks for 3 miles. I found Dr. Webb's camp empty. Their tents were still up. Coffee was cold in metal cups, but no people anywhere. That was strange. These college types were usually up early, eager to start digging. Then I saw the stone circle. It was about 30 feet across, made of gray stones taller than a person. Each stone was covered in carved symbols, spirals, lines, shapes that looked almost like writing. In the center was a flat altar stone, dark with age. The whole thing felt old, older than old, like it had been watching these mountains since before people had names for things. But something was wrong with it now. The grass around the stones grew in weird spirals instead of straight up. My compass spun wildly when I got close. And there was a sound so low I felt it more than heard it, like the earth itself was humming. I called out for Dr. Webb and his students. My voice echoed strangely off the cliffs, but nobody answered. That's when I noticed the cameras. All their equipment was arranged in perfect geometric patterns around the circle. Cameras, measuring tools, notebooks, everything placed with mathematical precision. The camera film was completely white, like it had been exposed to the brightest light imaginable. I should have left right then, should have hiked back to headquarters and called for backup. But I was curious, and curiosity has always been my weakness. That's when I found the journal. Dr. Webb's journal was lying open on the altar stone, which was impossible because I'd seen it in his tent the day before. The handwriting started normal but got shakier with each page. Day 12. The symbols appear to be astronomical. Star charts, maybe. Sarah thinks there's some kind of calendar. Day 15. Strange dreams. All of us having the same ones. Tall figures made of light, watching us work. Day 18. Equipment malfunction. Watches stop working near the center stone. Electromagnetic readings off the charts. Day 21. They came last night. Not dreams this time. Real. They spoke without words, showed us things. God help us, they showed us things. The last entry was barely readable. Day 22. We understand now. We've been chosen. The Watchers have returned for the judgment. Eleanor will come soon. She must be ready. My hands were shaking as I read my own name. How could they know I was coming? I'd decided to check on them that morning on a whim. That's when I heard the scream. It came from somewhere deep in the forest, high and desperate. Human, but wrong somehow, like it was being pulled through a tunnel. I grabbed my radio, but all I got was static mixed with a sound like whispers in a language I didn't recognize. The scream came again, closer this time. I started toward it, my boots crunching on leaves that seemed too loud in the sudden silence. Even the birds had stopped singing. I found them in a clearing about 100 yards from the stone circle. All 5 members of Dr. Webb's team, lying unconscious in a perfect star pattern. Their eyes were open, but rolled back white, and they were all smiling the same peaceful smile. Dr. Webb! I shook his shoulder, but he didn't respond. His skin was ice cold, but he was breathing. They all were, slow and steady, like they were in the deepest sleep of their lives. That's when I saw the marks. Each person had a small, perfectly round mark on their forehead, not burned or cut, but like the skin had been changed from the inside. The marks were warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with their own light. I tried to wake them, tried everything I could think of. Nothing worked. It was like their minds were somewhere else entirely. The sun was getting low when they finally stirred. Dr. Webb sat up first, blinking slowly like he was trying to remember how to see. The others followed, moving in the same careful, dreamy way. Eleanor, Dr. Webb said, and his voice was different. Calmer. You came. What happened to you people? I've been trying to wake you for hours. He smiled that same peaceful smile. We met them, the Watchers. They've been waiting so long for someone who could understand. He looked at me with eyes that seemed older than they should be. They want to meet you, Eleanor. Tonight, when the moon is full. Who wants to meet me? The ones who built the circle. The ones who've been watching over this place since before the Cherokee, before anyone. They're not from here, Eleanor, but they've been here longer than we have. Sarah, one of the graduate students, stood up slowly. The mark on her forehead was glowing softly in the dim light. They showed us the truth about humanity, about what's coming. We're going to be judged, Eleanor, all of us. Judged by who? Dr. Webb pointed toward the stone circle where strange lights were beginning to dance between the carved stones. By them, the ancient Watchers, and you're the one they chose to speak for our entire species. I should have run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of that valley and never come back. But looking at these people I'd known for months, I realized something that made my blood freeze. They weren't lying. They believed every word they were saying. As darkness fell, the stone circle began to glow, not with fire or electricity, but with a cold light that seemed to come from inside the stones themselves. The carved symbols pulsed in rhythm, like a heartbeat made of light. "You have to see," Sarah whispered, her eyes reflecting that strange glow. "They're beautiful, Eleanor. Terrible and beautiful." The temperature was dropping fast, but not in a normal way. It felt like the cold was coming from somewhere else, somewhere far away. My breath came out in white puffs, and frost began forming on the grass, even though it had been warm an hour before. That's when I saw my first watcher. It rose from the center of the stone circle like mist taking shape. Tall, maybe 10 feet, and made of something that wasn't quite light and wasn't quite solid. It had a human shape, but stretched wrong, too thin and graceful. Where its face should be, there were patterns of stars that shifted and changed as I watched. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. The thing turned toward me, and when it did, I heard a voice inside my head. Not words, but meaning pouring directly into my thoughts. "Eleanor Ravenswood, we have been waiting." More of them were rising, now, emerging from the ground around the stone circle like they'd been sleeping just beneath the surface. 5, then 10, then more than I could count. They moved without walking, flowed, rather than stepped. Dr. Webb and his team were walking toward them, arms outstretched like they were greeting old friends. The marks on their foreheads were burning brighter now. "Do not fear," the voice said inside my skull. "We mean no harm to those who can learn. But your species stands at a crossroads. We must know if humanity deserves to continue." "Continue what?" I said out loud, my voice cracking. Images flooded my mind, not my thoughts, but theirs. I saw Earth from space, blue and beautiful. Then I saw it covered in smoke and fire. Cities burning, oceans boiling, the planet dead and gray. "This is one path," the voice explained. "Destruction, war, the end of all things. Your species has the power now to choose this path." Then I saw the other path, Earth green and growing, stretching out to the stars. Humans working together, building things I couldn't even understand. Peace and knowledge and wonder. This is the other path, evolution, growth, joining the greater community of minds that spans the galaxy. And you decide which one we take. We guide, we watch, we judge. When a species reaches the crucial moment, when they gain the power to destroy or transcend, we appear. Some pass our test, others. Images of dead worlds flashed through my mind, planets that had failed the test. Dr. Webb was standing right next to one of the watchers now, his face full of wonder. "Eleanor, they've been doing this for millions of years, helping species grow, stopping them from destroying themselves. We're not the first." "What kind of test?" I asked. But I already knew the answer was going to change everything. The largest watcher drifted closer to me, and when it spoke, the ground itself seemed to vibrate. "You will represent your species, Eleanor Ravenswood. You will answer for humanity's worthiness. If you succeed, your people will be guided toward wisdom. If you fail..." The forest around us flickered like a mirage, and for just a moment, I saw it as it really was. Not trees and rocks, but a vast chamber carved from living stone, filled with technology that hurt to look at directly. We weren't in the forest anymore. We were somewhere else entirely, somewhere that existed between the spaces of normal reality. "The test begins at midnight," the watcher said. "Prepare yourself, Ranger. The fate of your entire species rests on what you decide in the next few hours." That's when I realized the most terrifying truth of all. I wasn't going to run. Despite everything, I was going to stay and take their test. Because if I didn't, who would? At 11:47 p.m., the watchers led me deeper into their hidden chamber. The walls were covered in symbols that moved and shifted when I looked at them directly. Star maps showing the paths of civilizations across time and space. "Sit," the largest watcher commanded, gesturing to a chair that hadn't been there a second before. It was made of the same strange material as everything else, warm and cold at the same time. The moment I sat down, my mind exploded with information. I saw the history of 1,000 worlds, species that had passed the test and joined a vast community of minds spanning the galaxy. Others that had failed and destroyed themselves with war, pollution, and hatred. Earth wasn't unique. We were just the latest species to reach the crossroads. The first test, the watcher said, is wisdom. Suddenly I was standing in what looked like the United Nations, but the faces around me weren't human. Alien beings from across the galaxy, all watching me with expressions I couldn't read. "Your species has nuclear weapons," one of them said in a voice like grinding metal. "You have the power to destroy your world. Why should we trust you not to use it?" I thought about the wars I'd lived through, the violence I'd seen. But I also thought about the archaeologists who spent their lives uncovering the past, the teachers who shaped young minds, the people who risk everything to help strangers. "Because we're learning," I said. "We make mistakes, terrible ones, but we learn from them. Each generation gets a little bit wiser, a little bit kinder. We're not perfect, but we're trying to be better." The scene shifted. Now I was in a laboratory where human scientists were working alongside alien researchers, sharing knowledge freely. "The second test," the watcher announced, "is compassion." I was shown suffering across the universe, entire civilizations dying from plagues, natural disasters, wars. The Alien Council watched me carefully. "Your people often ignore suffering even on your own world," another being observed. "Why should we believe you would care about the pain of strangers from other stars?" This one was harder. I thought about all the times humans had failed each other, all the cruelty and indifference. But then I remembered something. Because when we see real suffering, when we really understand it, we act, I said. Look at any disaster on Earth. People drop everything to help. They donate money, time, even their lives for strangers. We're not good at seeing distant pain, but when we do see it, we care. And you're asking us to see the whole universe. That will change us. "The final test," the watcher said, and its voice was softer now, "is choice." The chamber around me dissolved, and I was back in the stone circle. But it wasn't empty anymore. Every person I'd ever loved was there. My parents, my sister, my friends from college, people from town. They were all looking at me with terror in their eyes. Dr. Webb stood in the center, but he wasn't himself anymore. Something else was wearing his face, something with too many teeth. "Choose, Eleanor," he said in a voice like breaking glass. "Save your species, and everyone you love dies screaming. Fail the test and they live. But humanity destroys itself within 50 years. What's more important, the people you care about, or the abstract future of your species?" I stared at the faces of everyone I loved, seeing their fear, their trust that I would save them. My sister mouthed please at me, tears streaming down her face. This was the real test. Not wisdom or compassion, but what I was willing to sacrifice for the greater good. I closed my eyes and made my choice. "I choose humanity's future," I whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But if we fail this test, billions will die anyway. I have to choose the path that saves the most people, even if it costs me everything." The screaming stopped. When I opened my eyes, I was alone with the watchers in their true chamber. The people I loved had been illusions, a test to see if I could make the hardest choice possible. "You have chosen wisely," the largest watcher said, and for the first time, its voice seemed almost warm. "Your species shows promise. We will guide them, slowly and carefully, toward wisdom. What happens now? Now you go home. You remember. And you help prepare humanity for what comes next. We will be watching, Eleanor Ravenswood, and when your species is ready, We will make contact again. I woke up at dawn in my own bed at the ranger station, wearing clothes I didn't remember putting on. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream, the strangest, most vivid dream of my life. Then I saw the journal on my nightstand. My journal, filled with my own handwriting, describing everything that had happened. Things I definitely hadn't written. I drove to the valley as fast as I could. The archaeological camp was gone, not packed up, but gone, like it had never existed. The stone circle was still there, but the symbols were different now. Simpler, normal, the kind of markings any ancient tribe might have left. But when I touched the central stone, I heard it, that low humming, just at the edge of hearing. And I knew they were still there, watching. Dr. Webb and his team were found 3 days later in Washington, D.C., with no memory of how they'd gotten there. The university said they'd completed their survey early and returned to write their reports. The official record shows they found nothing unusual in the valley, just an old Native American ceremonial site of no particular significance. Only I remember what really happened. Only I carry the knowledge of what's coming. Since then, I've noticed changes, small ones. A scientist makes a breakthrough that seems to come from nowhere. A world leader suddenly decides to choose peace over war. Children are born who seem just a little bit wiser, a little bit more compassionate than the generation before. The Watchers are keeping their promise. They're guiding us, so slowly we don't even notice, preparing us for the day when we'll be ready to join the larger community of minds that spans the stars. I'm 63 now, still working these mountains, still protecting the old places. Sometimes hikers report strange lights in the valley or feeling like they're being watched. I always investigate. I always write the reports that explain it all away. Because some secrets are too big for most people to handle, but they need to be remembered by someone. They need to be recorded just in case. My replacement starts next month. A young man with a degree in archaeology and a respect for ancient cultures. I've been watching him, and I think he might be ready to learn the truth when the time comes. The Watchers told me that judgment never really ends. Every generation has to prove itself worthy. Every choice we make as a species is being evaluated, weighed against our potential for wisdom or destruction. So far, we're passing. But the test continues every day. In every act of kindness or cruelty, every choice between fear and understanding, every decision that makes us more human or less. They're still out there, in the spaces between what we think we know about reality. The ancient Watchers, older than our civilizations, patient, it is stone, judging us, guiding us, waiting to see what will become. And I'll be here in these mountains, keeping their secret, until someone else is chosen to carry the burden of knowing what's really at stake. After all, some Watchers guard the forest, others guard the future.